So I'm just fitting the stator bolts to the timing case, and also fitting the gland, or sorry, the nut that the gland will go on to feed the wires out from the stator, from the alternator, out through the casing. The problem is that these this stator stud and this sort of gland nut interfere with each other, and so you have to screw this in first and then the gland nut, which is very awkward. And not only that, but if you remember, I had major problems with this thread up here that the gland nut goes into, and Dave Smith had to drill it out, so the threads aren't brilliant. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to use some plumber's tape, PTFE tape, and put that around the threads, really just to seal them. Right, so I put a bit of PTFE tape round, and I've put the other two stator studs in already loosely. Put this third one in. Not going to fully tighten it, but it needs to be fairly tight so that this gland nut can get past the angles on the nut on the inside there. I deliberately didn't put tape on the beginnings of the thread, because I know that it's a bit of a damaged thread, and with the PTFE tape on it might not have found its way in at all. 9/16 spanner. I do have a box spanner somewhere, but I don't think you can get that on either because of this. Like I say, you have to put this on first, and then it's right in the way. But you see these, like the inner nut, right? This inner nut catches on this gland nut. If you can't put it in afterwards. And I'm going to do it up. The question is for this one, how tightly, because that thread's not great. It's okay, but it's, I certainly don't want to over tighten it. On the other hand, I don't want it to leak. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. A bit more. Yeah. Oh yeah. There, so that'll do it. Okay, and then I'll tighten the stator studs up. Having a set of these deep sockets is pretty priceless working on a bike, because there's always a time when you need to reach in, down the end of the stud or something to get to a nut. So not just a set of sockets, always get these deep sockets as well. Okay, and then we'll put the rotor on next, and then the stator. Right, I'm getting ready to fit the rotor into the timing cover, and this is a rotor which is standard to just about every Triumph ever made. Two things about the rotor really for us is, for a start, the rotor and stator are in the timing cover on a triple rather than in the primary chain cases, which is where they are on most Triumphs and Triumph twins. But above all, this is the normal side of the rotor with the timing mark for twins on it. but when you fit them to a triple, you fit them inside out, because lo and behold, on the back, expertly marked, are the timing marks on the back. So that is a timing mark for a twin. There's only one mark because the crank's 360 degrees, so both cylinders have the same timing mark. These are the timing marks for a triple, which have 6. One for each cylinder. Hang on a minute. No. 3 are marked A and 3 are marked B. And this is because the first Tridents that were made had this keyway in a different position, and so I think the 3 A's, I think it is, are used on earlier crankshafts, but then they changed the position. I'm not sure why, the keyway. So then later rotors used the B marks, and that's why there's 6 marks. Now, if you're using points, you need all 3 marks, because you do the ignition timing on each cylinder. Each set of points is set separately. But if you're using electronic ignition, like most of us these days, then you only need one of these, because you just set one cylinder, and because it's electronic ignition, the others are absolutely dead on. You don't then have to time the others, because once you time one, then that's it, because it's electronic and it's all set. So in fact, out of all these 6 marks, we're only going to be using one, which is on the drive side cylinder. When we come to set up the timing, ignition timing with a strobe, one of these marks will line up with a little mark on the timing cover, and that's the mark we set the timing to. But that's why there are 6 marks, and that's why you fit a Trident or a triple rotor inside out, because the lovely people at Lucas stroke Triumph stroke BSA decided that they couldn't be bothered to make a proper rotor to fit a Trident, so hey, just use the old one and just turn it inside out. Job done. I will warm this a bit, and then we're just going to knock it home onto, plugged in, so onto the end of the crankshaft. There we go. And there, the rotor's on. It's keyed into the shaft. Sorted. And then there's a nut that goes on the end here. What's happened with ours is, oops-a-daisy, there's actually a stud, and this stud screws into the end of the crankshaft, and then this nut goes on the end of the stud. But what happened in our case, when we unscrewed this whole stud came out rather than the nut coming off, which is fine. So I'm just going to put it back in as was. I'll see if that nut wants to come off the stud, but I can't. I don't think it will, and then I've got a problem actually screwing the stud in anyway. Okay, I've managed to get the stud in without the nut. So I'm now going to put a bit of, I put that in with some sealant on it, with some Loctite on it. So I'm now going to put some Loctite on the nut as well, so I don't want it coming off really. Some Loctite on, and then the lock tab washer which fits in the keyway of the rotor. Okay, I've probably got the camera in the wrong place now, but never mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now torque the nut up, the rotor nut up. That's up to 50 foot-pounds, and I've locked the engine by means of the adjustable on the crankshaft again, which is not best practice, I would be the first to admit, but it works. And ideally you should have a spare pinion from the crankshaft, and you can put it in between these sprockets here and lock the sprockets using a spare pinion, but I don't have one, and so I'm locking it as before. I think that idler shaft can take it, as long as you make sure that the lock is near the bottom of the shaft. There we go, 50 foot-pounds, and then what we need to do is bend the lock tab up, and the rotor's on. Okay, now that the rotor is fitted, it's time to fit the stator. And the stator fits around the rotor, and all that is just loads and loads and loads of wires wrapped round and round and round and round, because some clever person, I think it was Michael Faraday, I'm not sure, anyway, they discovered that if you move a magnet round inside a load of coiled wires, it generates electricity, which I always think is an amazing thing to discover, electricity, because it's not a natural, you can't see it apart from lightning and that. And how you have the idea that maybe moving a magnet round inside a load of wires would create a current, I don't know, but anyway they did, because they're very clever. The problem with these stators is that this wire sits in oil, and it gets very hot, and the combination of the oil and the heat makes this wire incredibly brittle. This wire is also already melted. I don't know what happened to that, but the main problem with this particular stator is this wire, I don't know how well you can see this, but it's where the wires are coming out of the stator, they've broken. They're still intact, but the outer sheath's broken. It's obviously very brittle, and they're making contact with each other. So it's almost impossible. Well, I don't know. I could have a go at mending that, but I'd have to mess about digging out the wires, and I don't think, and I wouldn't trust that it would work. So they're not that expensive. So here we have one brand new, bright new stator. 10 amp. It's only the basic stator. You can buy high output ones, you can buy 3-phase ones. 3-phase ones, as I understand, I'm not an electrician, so don't quote me, but 3-phase one means that it works in phases, and so it'll actually create current at lower revs. The rotors needs to be spinning very fast before it generates any current, so they're not as efficient as the 3-phase ones. What I tend to do on my bikes is I fit all LED lights and so on, and that means that the current from these stators is more than enough. As soon as you start turning headlights on, and then the current just drains straight away. But with LED bulbs, they take virtually no current, and these are fine. So new stator, which is going to go on, and then these are the rubbers that go on the wire. We'll put them on in a minute to stop it from leaking oil. Right, I'm now beginning to fit the stator over the rotor. To begin with, I've slid the rubber grommet on over the wire. This rubber grommet is going to go over the end of this gland here to try and stop oil escaping up this cable. I've fed the cable up through the gland. Those two jobs took me about half an hour, because this is incredibly tight on here. I'm trying to get the cable up through there, because it's actually a dog leg. Anyway, done. Now then we put the spacers on the back on the rotor studs, the studs that hold the stator on, and then we're going to loosely fit the stator. It has to be fitted in such a way that there is an even gap between the stator and the rotor all the way round. There should be a 10th thou gap, and I'm going to get my feeder gauge out in a minute and see if there's a 10th thou gap. Now the problem arises if there isn't an even gap all the way round. The only way you can adjust this is by literally bending these three stator mounting studs, which to say is a bit scary is, you know, an understatement, because obviously they're screwed into the crankcase. If you whack them too hard and you fracture the crankcase, you know, well, you don't want to go there. But that's the only way of making this adjustment, by actually bending these studs. So I'm hoping against hope that there is an even 10 thou gap and I won't have to adjust anything. But there must be, because the stator will burn out. If there isn't that even gap, then you know, forget it. So you've got to make sure that it is there, and it's a complete pain, because as you just seen, the studs are a very tight fit on the stator in the first place, and so taking the stator off, you know, it doesn't want to come off now, especially when it starts hitting these threads. And so if you have to keep taking it off and adjusting and sort of whacking the studs around, which is, you know, high stress, and then trying to put the thing back on and measuring it again is a complete nightmare. So anyway, I'm going to get my feeler gauge out, and let's fingers crossed that we've got a 10 thou gap all the way around. Looking at it, I don't think we have. Okay, I think we've got the stator on. There are 3 thick sort of spacers, washers that go behind the stator. We put them on, and then we fed the wire up through the gland, somehow managed to get that rubber boot on, and then you can't quite see that the wire comes out the back here, and that will then go up to the rectifier eventually. But I think here we have our 10 thou feeder gauge, and there we go all the way around. Yeah. Now that has taken a long time. All I can say is it was very hard work. You can try and tap these around with the stator in position, but they don't like to do it. So all you can really do is to take the stator off each time and tap them round. But then if you tap them round unequally, then the stator won't go back on, because, you know, one of these is out of line with the holes. You have to move all 3 mountings, studs, you know, exactly the same. But anyway, I'm pleased, because it wasn't right at all. We had no gap at the top, and we had about 20 thou at the bottom. Whereas now, yeah, I mean, that's 10 thou exactly all the way around. So, but that's been a job. So then there are spacers that go on again, and then there's nuts to tighten the whole thing up, and we're done. Okay, so we're just going to do the nuts up. We put on some Loctite. I've got some lock washers on as well. With a Loctite. And then these are done up to 8 foot-pounds. So I've got my mini torque wrench, and that should give us the correct torque. And there we are. Whew, so stator is on. Right, that's just about the timing case finished. And just to mention that if you want any more detailed information about what's on the videos, then there is the workshop manual that goes alongside the videos, and that covers restoring the whole bike, not just the engine. And that's available from all good booksellers around the world. You can just put my name, Chris Rook, into the search bar, like Amazon search bar or wherever, and it should come up.